If you spend enough time in philosophical circles or just...
Or just deep in the internet's more esoteric corners at 2 a.m.
Right, exactly. You eventually hit what I like to call the reincarnation wall. It's the ultimate skepticism stopper, the question that usually just shuts the whole conversation down before it even really gets started.
Which is, if I have lived before, if my soul is this eternal traveler jumping from body to body across centuries, why is the hard drive wiped clean every single time?
Yeah, why don't I remember being a Roman centurion or a medieval baker or a rice farmer in ancient China? And usually the answer you get is, well, it's pretty soft. It's theological. People will say you aren't meant to know, or it's a divine mystery.
Right.
But today we're doing a deep dive into a source that entirely refuses to accept mystery as an answer.
We really are. We're looking at a lecture from April 18th, 1923 by Rudolf Steiner. And what makes this specific text, it's titled The Life of Man on Earth and the Essence of Christianity. What makes it so incredibly interesting is that Steiner doesn't quote scripture to explain our memory loss. He uses biology.
Yeah.
He uses the effects of narcotics. And he uses the history of how human beings actually think.
It's a surprisingly nuts and bolts approach to the soul. I mean, we are going to get into some intense concepts here. And just to be clear, we're not endorsing these as modern medical facts, but simply unpacking the ideas in his original text.
Absolutely. And Steiner starts by addressing that exact tension. He calls out the tendency of his time, which, let's be honest, is definitely still true today, to put science in one box and spirituality in a completely different box.
Yeah.
He has this great line about how society treats brilliant scientists who dare to look at the spiritual side of things.
He mentions Sir William Crookes and Isaac Newton, right?
He does. Sir William Crookes was a heavyweight. I mean, he was a serious chemist, a pioneer in vacuum tubes. But he also researched psychic phenomena. And Steiner points out that the academic world's reaction is to just assume Crookes was clever in the morning and stupid in the afternoon.
I love that phrasing so much. Like, his IQ just dropped 40 points the moment he ate lunch.
Precisely. The assumption is that if you were looking at the soul, you must have just abandoned logic. But Steiner's entire premise here is that you need more logic, not less, to understand what happens after death. You have to treat the soul with the same rigor you treat a chemical compound. You can't just get fuzzy with it.
So let's look at his data set, because to explain why we don't remember our past lives, Steiner starts by looking at what happens when human consciousness is artificially hacked. He decides to look at the effects of opium.
Right, this is the experiment that nature provides. You don't need a lab. You just have to look at what was happening in parts of Europe and Asia at the time. Steiner argues that opium peels back the layers of the human being like an onion. By seeing what breaks down first, you understand how the machine is actually built.
It's reverse engineering the soul by watching it malfunction.
Exactly.
So he breaks this down into 3 stages of consumption. Let's walk through them because this gets into his specific terminology for the human makeup. Stage 1 is the small dose, or the weak consumption.
Right, the functional high.
Yeah.
When someone takes a small amount of opium or weak preparation, the first thing to go is the intellect. Logic fades. Rationality blurs. You can't do math. You can't construct a logical argument. But they aren't unconscious. In fact, they enter a state of vivid, wild dreaming. They feel this incredible well-being.
So the thinking part is suppressed, but the life part is turned up.
That is the perfect way to put it. And this gives us our first definition. Steiner calls the part of you that regulates life growth and vitality the etheric body. When the logical brain, which usually keeps a tight lid on things, is sedated, the etheric body just runs wild. That's why the dreams are so vivid. You are experiencing pure life force without the constraints of logic.
It's like taking the governor off an engine. It spins faster, but you completely lose control.
Yes, and Steiner points out that even though the person is irrational, the life principle is stronger than ever. They feel more alive, even if they make zero sense.
Okay, so stage 1 reveals the etheric body. Then we hit stage 2, the overdose.
The large, strong dose. Now, the patient isn't dreaming anymore. They are totally unconscious. Deep sleep. But it's not a peaceful, restorative sleep. The body cramps up. There's rattling, breathing, snoring. And Steiner focuses on a very specific, almost gruesome detail here. The face turns red and the lips turn blue.
He spends a surprising amount of time on the blue lips. Why is that clinically significant to him in a spiritual context?
He's connecting physiology directly to the astral body. In Steiner's model, the astral body is the seat of sensation, consciousness, and passion. Physiologically, he maps this to the blood. Red blood is oxygenated, so it's life coming in. Blue blood is carbon heavy, it's waste trying to get out. So red is the intake and blue is the exhaust.
Right.
When you overdose, the body is pushing the red oxygenated blood to the surface to the face. But the blue waste-heavy blood gets trapped inside. And Steiner views the lips as a really unique piece of anatomy. He calls them inner skin turned outward.
Oh, wow. So blue lips are basically a window showing that the interior is suffocating.
It shows the waste is trapped, the exhaust can't leave. For Steiner, this physical struggle between the red and blue blood is the physical sign that the astral body, the consciousness, is literally being forced out of the physical vessel. The body's becoming a house that is too toxic to live in, so the tenant leaves.
And this leads to that really fascinating etymology sidebar about blue bloods. I always thought that term just meant aristocracy, like you were so pale and fancy your veins showed through your skin.
That's the modern take on it, sure. But Steiner digs into the older folk wisdom. He says ancient people believed that if the blue blood, the waste was trapped inside, the soul had departed. To be blue-blooded originally meant you were a person without a soul or vitality. It was actually an insult long before it became a status symbol for nobility.
That is a wild flip. You're blue-blooded used to mean you're empty inside.
Exactly. It meant your soul couldn't breathe.
Okay, so to recap. Stage 1, small dose, reveals the etheric body, the life force. Stage 2, large dose, disrupts the astral body, the consciousness. Then he gets to the third stage, the habitual user,
Whoa.
the addict.
This is where the damage becomes permanent.
Yeah.
Steiner references the populations in parts of Asia. Specifically, he mentions the Malay people where opium use was endemic at the time. Yeah. He notes that the habitual user undergoes a very specific physical degradation. They get gaunt, hollow-eyed, they lose weight, but most importantly, their posture fails. They develop a limp. They essentially forget how to walk properly.
And this degradation targets the third part of the soul.
The ego. The I. And we have to be careful with the word ego here. He doesn't mean arrogance or pride. He means the core self, the I that makes you an individual.
How does a limp reveal the ego, though? That feels like a leap.
Well, Steiner makes a big distinction here between humans and animals. He says you can give an animal opium, and it might get hyper, which is etheric, or it might die, which is astral. But an animal cannot become a habitual opium eater in the human sense.
Because they don't have an ego.
Because they don't have the upright spine that correlates to the ego. Steiner argues that the human I, our sense of self, is physically anchored in our ability to stand upright against gravity. Think about it. A baby has to learn to stand. It's a conscious act of will.
Yeah.
We are constantly fighting gravity to be human.
That's very true. Animals are horizontal, we are vertical.
Correct. When the opium destroys the ego, the first thing to go is that upright will. The user physically collapses, they limp, they slouch, the I can no longer hold the house up.
So the drug systematically takes down the house floor by floor. First logic, then emotional balance, and finally the upright human will. But here's the much darker question Steiner poses. Why do people do it?
Right. Why destroy yourself?
Exactly. He suggests these habitual users aren't just chasing a high, they're chasing a memory.
This is the forbidden shortcut. Steiner claims that these specific populations were descendants of ancient peoples who possessed a natural dreamlike clairvoyance. They had a connection to the spiritual world that was completely intuitive. But as they modernized, as they entered the era of intellect, they lost it. Opium is a chemical key to force that door back open.
They're trying to hack their way back into the spiritual world.
And the scary part is it works.
Yeah.
But at a terrible cost. Steiner says the habitual user eventually triggers a massive, overwhelming memory. They actually see their past lives. They see the eternal part of themselves. They get the reincarnation data we are all looking for.
But the body can't handle it.
No. Steiner writes that too much memory destroys the body. It's like putting high voltage through a low voltage wire. You get the flash of light, but you burn out the circuit entirely. The stroke, the paralysis, the physical ruin that is the price of forcing a spiritual experience you simply aren't ready for.
So we have catch-22 here. We don't remember our past lives naturally. But if we force the memory with drugs, we destroy our brains and our bodies. Which brings us back to the central mystery of this deep dive. Why is the memory blocked in the first place? Is it a glitch? Are we just broken?
Steiner says absolutely not. It's not a glitch, it's an evolutionary trade-off. This is where we pivot from biology to history. Steiner argues that the way human beings think has fundamentally changed over the last few thousand years.
We tend to assume a Roman soldier or an ancient Egyptian thought just like us, just with different technology, like they were just modern people walking around in togas.
Right, we project our internal monologue onto them. Steiner says that's completely wrong. Ancient people lived in images. They didn't have abstract logic. They felt the world They didn't analyze it. They felt the spiritual world as a reality, almost like a vivid dream they were walking through.
In abstract logic, the way we think right now is new.
In the grand timeline, yes. Steiner pinpoints the shift specifically around the 15th century. That's when we started separating subject from object. That's when we became observers of the world rather than active participants in it.
He uses that example of teaching children the letter F to explain this shift, which I thought was brilliant.
It's a great example of the friction between the old way and the new way. If you show a 7-year-old the letter S and say this sound is F, the child creates a blockage. It's just an abstract squiggle on a page. It has no reality to them. It demands intellectual force to memorize.
Just cold data.
Correct. But if you draw a fish, an image the child naturally understands, and you trace the curve of the fins and the back to reveal the shape of the FQ, you build a bridge. You go from the living image, which is how we used to think, to the abstract thought, which is how we think now. Steiner says we as a species have crossed that bridge. We live in the abstract now.
And living in the abstract is the reason we have amnesia.
Yes, because image thinking was connected to the eternal. Abstract thinking is connected strictly to the brain, to the moment. We basically traded memory for freedom. We traded the big cosmic picture for the ability to focus on the details.
And this leads to my absolute favorite analogy in this entire lecture, the shirt button.
The shirt button. This is the solution to the riddle.
Let's break it down, because this is the practical application for you listening right now.
Okay, picture scenario A. A man is undressing for bed. He is tired. He's thinking about work, or he's just zoning out. He rips his collar off and tosses his shirt buttons. Geiner's generation had those detachable collar buttons. He tosses them somewhere in the room. He goes to sleep.
Morning comes.
Morning comes. He needs the buttons to get dressed. Can he find them?
No.
No. He has to search the room. He's frustrated. He has zero memory of where they are. Why?
Because he wasn't paying attention?
Because he performed the action without conscious thought. The data was never encoded. I wasn't present.
Okay, scenario B.
Scenario B. The man takes off the buttons, and he consciously says to himself, even if just internally, I am placing this button by the candlestick and this button on the table. He links the physical action with a focused conscious thought. He creates a mental picture.
Morning comes.
He goes straight to the buttons.
Because he created a link.
Because he used his eye. He used his ego to stamp the memory. Now here's the big reveal. Steiner says that in our past lives, in those ancient times, we were like the man tossing the buttons. We lived in images and feelings in a kind of group buzz, but we didn't have this sharp individual self-aware thinking. We didn't place the buttons with intent.
So when we wake up in this life, which is the morning after, we can't find them.
We can't find them. We have amnesia, not because the gods wiped our minds, but because we didn't have the tool to create a memory that could survive the night. We didn't have the I developed enough to carry the memory across the threshold of death.
That completely reframes the purpose of our lives right now.
It does. Steiner says we are currently living in the era where we are learning to use the tool. This abstract, logical, sometimes cold thinking we've developed, this is the mechanism. If we use it to understand our spiritual nature, now we're placing the buttons for our next life.
We are building the hard drive for the future version of ourselves.
Thought is the seed of memory. That's the core thesis. If you go through life on autopilot, reacting to social media, following habits, just tossing your buttons, you won't remember this life and the next one. But if you engage in what Steiner calls spiritual science, if you actively try to understand the mechanics of your soul with clear, logical thought, you are creating continuity.
It's really interesting that he calls it spiritual science. Because usually when people talk about connecting to the spirit world, they talk about shutting down the mind, meditation trances, feeling the vibes, lighting candles and zoning out.
And Steiner is aggressively against that. He thinks that is going backward. He calls it atavistic. If you try to return to the old dreamy way of the ancients, you are just dulling the sharp tool you spent thousands of years evolving. You're basically trying to go back to kindergarten.
He actually tells a pretty funny story about a seance to prove this point.
The flower seance. Yes, this is a great anecdote. So Steiner is dragged to a seance with a famous medium. The room is dark, spooky music is playing, and notice the parallel to the opium den here, numbing the senses. Everyone is in a heightened emotional state. Suddenly, fresh flowers start falling from the ceiling.
Which would be impressive.
It is impressive. Everyone is gasping. They're shouting. It's a miracle. The spirits are showering us with blessings.
And Steiner decides to play detective.
Right. He, or rather the sensible people he was advising, decided to take a much closer look at the impresario, the medium's assistant. It turns out the guy had a hunchback, a very pronounced physical hump.
Okay.
And inside the false hump, he had a spring-loaded flower dispenser.
No way.
Yes, he would just trigger it during the emotional peak of the music.
So the spirits were literally just a guy with a mechanical hump.
Exactly. And Steiner's takeaway isn't just to point out this guy as a fraud. It's to show that if you shut off your critical thinking, if you sit in the dark and beg to be dazzled, you invite fraud. You're making yourself completely vulnerable.
Yeah.
True spirituality for Steiner happens in the daylight. It happens with that sharp shirt-button thinking.
He has another one about poltergeists that I loved. Check for cats.
Yes. He says if objects are flying off the shelves in an English country house, don't immediately assume demons. Check if the homeowner has an army of cats. Because a few rabid cats jumping around can look very supernatural if you are already predisposed to believe in ghosts.
It's such a grounding reality check. He's saying don't be the guy who is clever in the morning and gullible in the afternoon. Be clever all day.
Apply your scientific mind to the invisible world. That is the only way to build a memory that lasts. Do not rely on trance. Rely on clear, conscious thought.
So bringing this all together, we started with the question of why we don't remember. We looked at the opium addict who destroys their physical body to force a memory they simply aren't equipped to handle. And we landed on the idea that our current amnesia is actually a necessary phase. We had to lose the old, dreamy connection so we could develop this sharp, independent thinking.
And now that we have it, we have to use it. We are the first generation, historically speaking, that has the true potential to remember our own lives if we do the work.
It really puts a pressure on the day-to-day, doesn't it? It suggests that our intellectual effort, our attempt to understand the world, isn't just about paying the bills or passing a test. It's about building a vessel for the soul.
It is the difference between a wasted life and a remembered one.
Steiner ends the lecture with a bit of a challenge regarding how we define ourselves. The plucked rooster.
Ah, the Diogenes reference.
Right. The old Greek definition of a human was a biped without feathers. So a student plucked a chicken and threw it into the lecture hall, shouting, "Here is your human."
Because it fits the definition perfectly. 2 legs, no feathers. But obviously it's not a human. Steiner's point is that abstract definitions are dead. If you define a human just by biology or just by job title, you are looking at a plucked rooster. You aren't seeing the reality.
To see the reality, you have to look deeper.
You have to see the etheric, the astral, the ego. You have to see the struggle between the red blood and the blue blood. And most of all, you have to see the being that is capable of placing the shirt button with intention.
So that is the takeaway for you, the listener, today. Are you moving through your week like a plucked rooster, just fitting the definition, doing the routine, reacting to the feed? Or are you actively placing your buttons?
Are you creating the kind of conscious thoughts that are strong enough to survive the reboot? That's the question you have to answer.
Something totally outside the lecture, but that really builds on this, is the idea of memory journaling. Not just writing down what happened, but writing down exactly how you thought about what happened. If thought is the seed of memory, forcing yourself to articulate your exact mental state might be the ultimate way of placing those buttons.
I love that. Turning the abstract back into a concrete self-reflection.
That is definitely something I'm going to be thinking about the next time I undress for bed. It makes you want to pay attention to where you put your keys at the very least.
Start small. The eternal memory will follow.
Thanks for taking the dive with us.
My pleasure, anytime.
We'll see you on the next one.